Louisiana has some of the toughest sentencing laws in the country, and these guys are not going home.
This is a prison where men are expected to die, not rehabilitate. At Louisiana Angola Prison, inmates collapse in the fields from heat exhaustion, wait months for medical care, and live knowing help may never come. Guards are outnumbered. Prisoners enforce order themselves. For decades, Angola has buried a dark secret, and it is about to be exposed. A prison built to never let you leave. Roughly 3 out of every 4 men held there are serving life sentences without any chance of parole. That single reality shapes every part of the prison. When a place assumes that most of the people inside will die behind its walls, everything changes. Responsibility fades away, effort disappears, healthcare slows down, education loses value, hope is treated as unnecessary. Men arrive at Angola fully aware that the state has already decided how their lives will end. That knowledge sinks in fast and never leaves. It creates a deep and controlled sense of hopelessness that shapes how people act, how they obey, and how they survive. This danger grows stronger because of where Angola sits. The prison is surrounded by rivers, open farmland, and miles of isolation. Escape is almost impossible. The outside world feels very far away. Complaints can take months or years to move forward. Lawsuits drag on for so long that many of the men who file them never live to see an outcome. Guards understand that the people they watch have very little leverage. Administrators understand that public attention is limited and political pressure is weak. This shared understanding allows conditions to worsen without immediate consequences. Living conditions can decay. Abuse can be ignored. Life slowly drains away through neglect rather than force. And none of this happened by mistake. The system did not drift into this state. It inherited it. The land where Angola stands was designed for control and forced labor from the very beginning. From slave plantation to prison farm. When the Louisiana State Penitentiary was created in 1901, the land did not become safer or more humane. The state took a former slave plantation and gave it a new purpose, but the logic behind it stayed the same. Forced labor did not end. It was legalized. What had once been enforced through chains was now enforced through law, and the suffering that followed was not an accident or a failure of the system. It was the system. Men arrived at Angola expecting punishment for crimes, but what they found was a life built around exhaustion and fear. They were housed in crude wooden structures that offered no real shelter from heat, rain, or insects. During storms, buildings flooded and bedding soaked through. During summer, the heat became suffocating. Mosquitoes swarmed constantly, carrying malaria and yellow fever through the camps. Sick men were not isolated or treated. They were sent back to work until they collapsed. Many died within months of arrival, not from violence, but from neglect that everyone in power accepted as normal. The land itself revealed the truth. The fields had already been carved out for large-scale labor long before the prison existed. Former slave quarters were reused to confine prisoners. Barns, levees, and work sheds were already in place. Prisoners were forced to work these fields from before sunrise until late in the day, under armed guards who watched from horseback. Many men were barefoot, wearing thin uniforms that offered no protection. Tools were limited, rest was rare, and slowing down was treated as disobedience. If a man showed weakness, he was punished. If he complained, he was beaten or isolated. Every part of daily life was controlled. Food was deliberately cheap and repetitive, just enough to keep bodies moving but never strong. Hunger weakened prisoners and made them easier to control. Medical care was minimal and often withheld as punishment. There was no real way to report abuse. Guards had complete authority, and the courts refused to intervene. Whippings, beatings, and extended isolation were used openly to enforce productivity. Deaths were written down in records but rarely questioned and almost never investigated. Angola quickly became profitable. crops were sold to outside markets. Livestock and timber generated revenue. The state praised the prison as efficient and self-sustaining, even as men continued to die at alarming rates. From the beginning, Angola worked exactly as intended. It extracted labor, enforced obedience, and operated beyond meaningful accountability. Over time, a system of inmate enforcers developed, where prisoners were given power over other prisoners, creating fear and violence that the administration could deny responsibility for. The danger inside Angola has never been limited to physical harm. It is structural and psychological. When forced labor is legal, abuse does not need to be hidden. It only needs routine. Guards do not have to act in secret. Suffering does not need to be denied. It only needs to be accepted. Angola survives on normalization, on the slow erosion of resistance, and on silence. And when someone inside that system finally refused to stay silent, the prison responded with a punishment so extreme that it exposed just how far Angola was willing to go to protect itself. The stubborn prisoner Angola tried to erase. When Albert Woodfox entered Angola in 1972, he walked into a prison that already knew how to destroy men. Violence ruled daily life. Sexual violence was common and openly ignored. Racial lines decided who worked indoors and who was sent into the fields. Silence was not encouraged. It was enforced. Woodfox had grown up surrounded by poverty, police pressure, and constant suspicion in New Orleans. Long before prison, he had learned what it meant to be watched, followed, and treated as disposable. By the time he arrived at Angola, the system expected him to submit. Instead, he started paying attention. Inside the prison, he saw how the machine worked. Black prisoners were pushed hardest and punished fastest. Guards rarely intervened when prisoners assaulted each other. Inmate enforcers were rewarded for brutality. Complaints disappeared. Men who talked too much vanished into isolation cells. The message was clear: survive quietly or suffer loudly. Woodfox chose neither. He began reading whatever he could get his hands on: political books, law books, anything that explained power and resistance. He listened to other prisoners and documented what they were too afraid to say out loud. He helped expose sexual abuse, racial punishment, and guard corruption. He encouraged men to file grievances, even when it meant retaliation. Slowly, Angola noticed him. When Woodfox aligned with the Black Panther Party inside prison, the threat became real. He was no longer just surviving. He was teaching men that fear could be challenged. That was something Angola could not tolerate. After a prison guard was murdered, Woodfox was accused, and everything collapsed at once. The case was weak from the beginning, held together by shaky witnesses and evidence that was later proven to be hidden or twisted. Black jurors were pushed out, and the verdict came down before he ever had a real chance. Years later, federal courts ruled that his conviction was unconstitutional due to racial discrimination in jury selection and prosecutorial misconduct. For a brief moment, Woodfox believed the nightmare was ending. It did not.
April 17, 1972, Correctional Officer Brent Miller was killed. I was the first man locked up for investigation, an investigation that led to my solitary confinement for over 44 years.
Each time a court overturned the murder conviction, Louisiana prosecutors responded by filing new indictments related to the same prison killing or by reviving older charges, ensuring Woodfox was never released. Alone in his cell, the anger poured out of him. He screamed until his throat burned. "I didn't do this. I'm innocent. Give me justice." He shouted it again and again, pounding on the walls when no one answered. "You can't keep me here forever. You can't do this." Some days he hit the concrete so hard his fingers split open, not because he wanted the pain, but because he needed proof that he still existed. Freedom was shown to him, then ripped away, over and over, until hope itself became something that hurt. What followed was punishment disguised as procedure. Woodfox was locked into solitary confinement for decades. His cell was barely large enough to pace, The walls never changed. The silence was constant. Meals were slid through a slot. Human contact vanished. He was allowed 1 hour a day outside the cell, often alone, often in extreme heat or cold. This went on for years, then decades. The isolation was justified as security, even though Woodfox showed no violent behavior. The goal was simple: break him. But Woodfox refused to be shaken. He exercised in the tiny space. He built strict routines to keep his mind from collapsing. He worked with attorneys and continued fighting his case. Outside the prison, human rights organizations began paying attention. The longer his confinement lasted, the harder it became for the state to explain. By 2016, the pressure was impossible to ignore. Louisiana finally agreed to release him. The murder charge was dismissed. The state avoided admitting wrongdoing by tying his release to earlier convictions, but the truth was unavoidable. After more than 40 years, Woodfox walked free. His story exposes something Angola never wanted seen. The harshest punishment inside that prison is not reserved for the most violent men. It is reserved for those who resist. And for the men who never get solitary confinement, Angola has another weapon waiting. Heat, forced labor, and the cost of slowing down. Angola's farm line is one of the largest in the United States. Thousands of incarcerated men are forced to work outdoors in the sweltering Louisiana heat. During summer, temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees, yet the work does not stop. The fields stretch for miles, and the men are expected to keep pace day after day, hour after hour. There is no relief built into the system. The labor is relentless. This is not voluntary work. Refusal to participate can lead to serious consequences, including solitary confinement or the loss of privileges that make daily life more miserable. Even slowing down can be punished as disobedience. The prison does not automatically excuse people with medical conditions. The system values output over human safety. Sweat, fatigue, and collapse are treated as inconveniences, not emergencies. The work is designed to push men to their physical limits while maintaining complete control. In the 2023 and the 2024 court filings revealed the human cost of this system. Men were collapsing in the fields from heat-related illnesses. The filings described desperate conditions, including workers left without immediate water, shade, or medical attention. Courts found that prison officials had shown deliberate indifference to serious risks. Only after judicial intervention were minimal protections introduced. These measures included short breaks, temporary shade, and limited access to water. Even these small changes were grudgingly applied and inconsistently enforced. The danger is not only the heat itself, it is the punishment that comes when the body cannot keep up. When exhaustion is treated as defiance, every human limit becomes a liability. Men are forced to push themselves past what is safe simply to avoid discipline. The threat is never shouted or posted in writing. It is understood, felt in every step, every heavy breath, and every drop of sweat that stings the eyes in the relentless sun. Fear becomes internalized, forcing people to comply with a system that refuses to recognize human fragility. Even when courts intervene, enforcement remains inconsistent. Oversight is reactive, not proactive. The protections are not guaranteed by policy or routine checks. They only exist when someone files a lawsuit and the legal system forces change. That process can take months or years, and most of the men simply do not have that amount of time. Meanwhile, bodies continue to break down in the fields, weakened by unrelenting work and insufficient care. And when those men finally need medical attention, another failure becomes impossible to ignore. Medical neglect that turns sentences into death warrants. Federal courts have repeatedly ruled that Angola's healthcare system is unconstitutional. That fact alone reveals the depth of the crisis. Medical care inside the prison is chronically delayed, understaffed, and poorly managed. Oversight is weak, and many providers are unqualified to handle serious conditions. Illnesses that could be treated early often progress unchecked, leaving men to suffer terribly. Many incarcerated people at Angola are aging. Life sentences mean that chronic illness is common. Conditions like diabetes, heart disease, kidney failure, and hypertension are widespread. Yet the prison's responses are slow. Requests for treatment are frequently dismissed. Symptoms are minimized or simply ignored. Transfers to outside hospitals can be delayed for days, weeks, or even months. For many men, these delays can be fatal. Deaths at Angola follow a grim, predictable pattern. Men report symptoms, complaints are ignored, requests for care are lost or denied. When the situation becomes critical, intervention finally arrives, but too late to save the person. Courts have repeatedly described this not as a series of mistakes, but as systemic indifference. The prison is not acting with malice in every instance. It is acting with calculated inaction, allowing illness to progress without interruption. Medical neglect is reinforced by punishment. Seeking care or insisting on treatment can mark someone as difficult, and those labeled as difficult face severe consequences. Solitary confinement, loss of privileges, or harsher treatment in the fields. Fear becomes a weapon. It ensures that complaints are muted, that suffering continues in silence. The same system that forces labor and controls every movement also discourages resistance, reinforcing submission at every level. And that culture of control does not end with adults. At one point, Angola even extended the same brutal approach to children, when the state locked children inside Angola. In 2022, Louisiana made the decision to transfer juveniles into a building inside Angola. Officials called it a short-term solution. Courts called it unconstitutional, a violation of the most basic standards of justice for children. Yet the transfer happened anyway. Inside Angola, the youths were placed in conditions that mirrored solitary confinement. They were isolated for long periods, with limited social contact and minimal opportunity for meaningful activity. Education was inconsistent at best. Classes were irregular, and lessons often failed to meet basic standards. Mental health services were almost entirely absent. Staff trained in child development were scarce, if present at all. The environment intensified every risk to the children. Extreme Louisiana heat baked the concrete yards and crowded rooms. Sleep was disrupted by constant surveillance and loud alarms. Anxiety and fear were constant companions. These were minors, some barely teenagers, placed inside one of the harshest adult prisons in the country. Angola was not equipped to care for them, and the state made no real effort to ensure it did. The choice was not about rehabilitation or education. It was about control. The system's priorities were clear. Containment mattered more than care. This decision exposed how deeply normalized harsh punishment had become in Louisiana. If children could be placed inside Angola, the system had completely abandoned the concept of age-appropriate justice. The moral and legal boundaries that should have protected them were treated as obstacles rather than rules. When a federal judge finally ordered that the youths be removed, the state defended its actions vigorously. The defense revealed a chilling truth. Angola was not considered a last resort. It was considered a viable option. It was not an exception in extreme circumstances. It was part of the system's toolbox for enforcing control, for punishing, and for breaking people who could not, or would not comply. The public image that makes Angola even more dangerous. Angola is presented as a historical place because the prison itself is treated as part of Louisiana's penal history. It has operated continuously for over a century and is promoted as a symbol of how the state's prison system evolved. That framing is reinforced through public messaging, tours, and official narratives that emphasize longevity and tradition rather than accountability. The prison hosts the Angola Prison Rodeo, which is marketed as a cultural event rather than a reflection of incarceration. It also contains a museum that focuses on artifacts, guards, and the evolution of the prison over time. Visitors are guided through curated displays that highlight institutional history instead of current conditions. This public image is dangerous because it turns a living prison into a finished story. By presenting Angola as history, culture, and tradition, It trains people to look backward instead of paying attention to the present. The institution becomes something to observe rather than something to question. What is framed as heritage remains an active system of control, and the harm continues while visitors are taught to admire the past. Make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos.